Hi, I'm David Gregg. I'm the director of the Rhode Island Natural History Survey, and you're watching the February meeting of the Rhode Island Woodland Partnership. This month's special presentations continue a dialogue that began with the January meeting when we heard from forester Mike Ferrucci. This month we're going to hear from Paul Catanzaro, who's a forester at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, and who collaborated with Tony D'Amato, a forester at the University of Vermont, on research into old growth forests in New England. Paul's going to talk about the definition of old growth forests and about the difference between old growth forests and forests with old growth characteristics. We're also going to hear from Nathan Cornell. Nathan is with the Old Growth Tree Society, and he's been researching trees in Rhode Island, and he's going to tell us about what he's been finding. Each of the presentations is followed by a discussion, and at the end of the program, there's the usual updates from the partners and other news on forest conservation. Be sure to tune in next month for more special presentations on hot topics in Rhode Island woodland conservation, and we'll see you next time. The Rhode Island Natural History Survey presents videos to showcase the animals, plants, geology, and natural systems that surround us, and the people and organizations working to understand and conserve them.
February Rhode Island Woodland Partnership meeting. I think we'll have a good meeting today. Have a busy agenda. My name is Christopher Riley. I am the co-coordinator of the partnership, and we're going to start off the meeting with a couple of interesting presentations on older forests. And we typically start off with a round of introductions. I think that's especially important today, since we have some folks who haven't participated in a partnership meeting before. So we'll just go around, each can say our name and your affiliation or organization. I may call on you just going around the screen to make that easier. And then Kate will have a bit of information, and we'll launch into our presentations. Kate, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. Hi, I'm Kate Sales. I am the co-coordinator of the Woodland Partnership and the director of the Rhode Island Land Trust Council. Mark Tremblay, over to you.
Yes, Mark Tremblay, forester with consulting forester, and also outreach coordinator with RIFCO, the Rhode Island Forest Conservators Organization, which is the Forest Landowners Association here in Rhode Island.
Thanks, Mark. Let's go over to Fern.
Hi, I'm Fern Graves. I am with Rhode Island DEM, and I am the forest stewardship program coordinator, which means I work with private landowners as well as loggers.
Thanks, Fern. How about John on prudence?
Good afternoon. I'm John Mitchell, work with the Narragansett Bay Research Reserve, and right now I'm on Prudence Island.
Thanks. Next we'll go to Scott.
Hi, everyone. I'm Scott Millar. I am the Director of Conservation and Community Assistance with Grow Smart, Rhode Island.
Great. And over to Doug.
Hi, everybody. I'm Doug Still. I'm the City Forester in Providence.
Thanks. And David.
I'm David Gregg. I'm the director of the Rhode Island Natural History Survey.
Good to have you here. And our other Scott.
Hi, I'm Scott Roran, Director of Conservation at the Audubon Society of Rhode Island.
Super, thanks. And on to Rich.
Good afternoon. My name is Rich Blodgett. I'm the watershed manager at Providence Water.
Thanks, Rich. TJ.
Hi, everybody. Jay Boudreau. I'm the Deputy Chief of the Division of Forest Environment here at DEM. Thanks.
Great. Nathan.
Hello, my name is Nathan Cornell. I'm with the Old Growth Tree Society, and I'm a member also of the Old Forest Network. I'm one of their two co-coordinators for Rhode Island. I'm also on the Work Land Trust.
Good to have you here. And how about Ashley?
Hi, I'm Ashley Martone. I'm a soil conservationist in Southern Rhode Island for NRCS.
Thanks, Ashley. How about Alana?
Hey everyone, Alana Russell. I'm the URI Biocontrol Lab Manager and the Rhode Island State Coordinator for the Forest Ecosystem Monitoring Cooperative.
Thanks. And Molly.
Hi, everyone. I'm Molly Allard. I'm the Outreach and Education Program Manager for the Northern Rhode Island Conservation District.
Super. And on to Jen.
Yep. Hi, everyone. Jen West. I'm the Coastal Trading Program Coordinator with the Narragansett Bay Research Reserve.
Super. How about Marina?
Hi there, I'm Marina Capraro. I am the Agriculture and Forestry Program Manager for the Northern Rhode Island Conservation District.
Thanks. And Pat.
Yeah, hi everyone. A conservation planner for the Southern Rhode Island Conservation District.
Thank you. How about you, Lou?
I'm Lou, the Urban and Community Forestry Program Coordinator with DEM.
Great. Cynthia.
Hi, I'm Cynthia Kolick. I am the CAPS Coordinator to the Cooperative Agricultural Pest Survey Program Coordinator for DEM's Division of Agriculture.
Great. Annie.
Hi, everybody. I'm Annie Reagan. I work for NRCS as a soil conservationist in the Northern District.
Thanks. And Paul, good to have you back.
Hi, everybody. Paul Roselli, President of the Bartlesville Land Trust, the all-volunteer land trust in the Great White North of Rhode Island.
Excellent. Nancy, how about you?
I'm Nancy Stairs. I'm the Cooperative Forestry Program Supervisor, sorry about that, with the Division of Forest Environment.
Thanks. And finally, Paul from Massachusetts.
Hi, I'm Paul Catanzaro from University of Massachusetts.
Great. It's wonderful to have such a good crowd here this afternoon.
Christopher, we got two more. We got Nate Lucas and we've got Tamara from NRCS. I don't know how to say your last name, Tamara.
Oh, all right. Tamara, we'll give you a chance to introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tamara Atsvatatarova. I work for the Rhode Island NRCS as a resource conservationist.
All right, great. And I think that was, do we have anyone else who hasn't introduced themselves?
Nate Lucas.
Okay, Nate. Can't hear you right now, Nate.
That's okay. We can.
Glad to have you here. Well, Kate, as the co-coordinator, thought it'd be helpful just in launching into the meeting, just to have a bit of background and context on the partnership and what our mission and focus is all about as we.
Sure. So the Rhode Island Woodland Partnership has been around for nearly a decade. We were founded in April 2013 as a collaboration or a network with the goal or mission to advance the stewardship and long-term protection of Rhode Island's forests, to benefit the local economy, boost ecological values for wildlife, biodiversity, and forest health, and to think through community engagement and education. Overall, our collective goal is to increase the impact of forest conservation through education and information sharing. We meet once a month, generally on the third Thursday. Often it's been Zoom for the last couple years, but we are trying to get out on the landscape, learn more about what our partners are doing with their own organizations. We open our meetings to learn new things. We generally have a focal topic each month. Shout out to the Natural History Survey for maintaining videos of our Zoom meetings. Our Zoom meeting from the RIFCO demonstration woodlot in December is now up on their website. We can share that link. Next, I just want to give a few comments about future meetings this spring. Our March meeting will be joined by Groundworks Providence. They will be giving us a presentation on the Trees for Us project. We are really trying to plan a trip out to Prudence Island to the research reserve. We've been working with John Mitchell to plan that, and I just dropped the Google form in the chat to try to find a date that works for everyone for a day of adventuring on Prudence as well as strategic planning. So please fill that out if you're interested in participating. There's a few other things that have come up, the Northeast Forest Farmers Coalition, the RIFCO biochar project. So we're hoping that in the next few months, we'll be able to investigate those topics a little bit more. We have a super tight schedule today. We have 2 presenters, which is really exciting. So I just want to let everyone know how this facilitation is going to go. Christopher is going to give the introductions and sort of facilitate our speakers and our topics as we go forward. I'm going to make sure we're keeping everyone on track. So I will be timing the presentations. Each speaker will have 30 minutes, and then we will have 10 minutes for question and answers. So please hold your questions until the end of both presentations. Keep your questions concise. I will give the speakers a 5-minute signal by waving. And if we get close to the end, around 2 minutes, I will say something verbally so we know. And then we are going to hold partner updates until the end of this meeting. So I think that that's it. And I'm passing it back to Christopher.
Thanks, Kate. Well, it's great to have these 2 presentations. And we're going to start off by hearing from Paul Catanzaro, who's Extension Associate Professor and the State Extension Forester at Massachusetts, the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. And he's going to talk about restoring old growth characteristics. Paul, I'll hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Christopher and Kate. You can see my slides okay? Great. Outstanding. The first thing I want to do is just recognize my collaborator, Tony D'Amato at the University of Vermont. This has been a project that we've been collaborating on for more than 15 years. And in fact, some of the data that I'll present today actually come from Tony's original dissertation work when he was at UMass. But I want to talk to you today just a little bit about restoring old growth characteristics. We're going to start with a conversation about old growth themselves and some of the characteristics that separate old growth from second growth forests, and then talk about both the passive and active approaches to restoring some of those characteristics, and even have a quick conversation about landscape context before we conclude. So just 2 quick definitions, just to make sure we're all on the same page with what we're talking about, at least in this presentation. So by an old growth forest, I mean a forest that's never been directly impacted by human land use. And by that, in New England, we primarily mean logging and agriculture. I'm also going to use the term second growth forests. So that's forests that have established and grown following some sort of land use. Could be logging, could be clearing for agriculture, pasture reversion, and etc. There are 2 photos here, both hemlock forests, both beautiful forests, but they're different. You know, the one on the left is an old growth forest, more than 400 years old. And then we have sort of a typical second growth forest that's hemlock as well. Same species composition primarily, but have different attributes, different benefits. And that's part of what we want to tease apart today. So if we were to look back, what is the past extent of old growth in New England? And so the estimates range from about 70 to 90% of the landscape prior to European settlement would have been what we now call old growth. And when you're sitting in Rhode Island, you're probably closer to that 70% because of your cover and disturbance types and so forth. But, you know, to be sure, a majority of the landscapes in New England were in what we now call old growth forest. So how much do we have today? The number on the left from Massachusetts is very precise. This was Tony's dissertation work. So he estimated there were just over 1,100 acres of old growth remaining in Massachusetts. That's far less than 1%. That's about 1/10% of the forests in Massachusetts. And in Rhode Island, we took a look at the Mary Bird Davis book, the Eastern Old Growth Forest book, which did an exhaustive look across New England at old growth forests and where the opportunities for recovery might be and rediscovery and things. And according to the book, there was not old growth forest that they found in Rhode Island. So I'll be very curious and interested to hear what Nathan says after me. But I think, despite the numbers, the specific numbers, I think we can say that there isn't a lot of old growth left in southern New England. And I think that's the main point. Why isn't there a lot of old growth left in New England? Well, we have a very long history in New England of interactions between human and forest ecosystems. And so, from a pre-colonial land use history perspective, we've had a number of tribes, living in Rhode Island for centuries, thousands of years. And I'm not going to venture a guess as to the extent of their land use change and forest interactions. I'll leave that to the local experts in these various tribes to talk about, what their history is with that landscape, and let them characterize the frequency and intensity and so forth of things like burning. But to be sure, humans have been living among forests in this region for a long time and have interacted with them. From a colonial land use history perspective, it's a pretty familiar story across the landscape, across the region that you're familiar with. So there was, clearing for subsistence farming, and then a large clearing for more of a market-based farm approach, largely on pasture. And then, a regrowth of those pastures as people moved off and found other areas in the country to farm. And then the regrowth of white pine primarily. White pine does very well on those old pastures. And so we had a wave of white pine, and then, harvesting of white pine primarily for boxboards to transport goods as people were moving from east to west in the United States. So the bottom line is we have had a lot of interactions with forests through time, particularly in this colonial period of our region. We've had, two essentially wholesale clearings of the forest, and that's why we don't have many of these old growth forests left. So if we were to take a look, this is an illustration that that I adapted from Hagen and Whitman, and it's been adapted for a number of years now. So in fact, it's been adapted 20 years ago. So I put that red box, probably where our forests generally speaking are now. So we've got a lot of forests at a very similar age, which gives them very similar structure, okay, and very similar species composition. And that's really good news if you're somebody or an animal or a plant that does well in those systems. But we don't, we're sort of just on the beginning end, or the beginning of that range where we start seeing forests develop these old growth characteristics. And you'll see that red on both sides, that because in the region we have so many forests in this sort of middle range, really what we're missing, particularly from a habitat perspective, are young forests and very old forests, so this old growth. And I just want to be clear, even though I'm not going to dwell on early successional habitat, because that's not what we're not here to talk about today. I have given this presentation. I have had people come up to me afterwards and be a little frustrated with me that they felt as though I was somehow discounting early successional habitat. I want to be very clear. I'm not. These are really critical habitats that a number of species depend on, that we're seeing significant declines in. So there is an urgent conservation need out there. And I guess I don't think that this is an either or choice. We need both, and we can have both across the landscape. It just happens that there has been a real focus on the early successional habitat, certainly in the last 10 or 15 years. And when we started working on this project, in part, it was because we wanted to, to also highlight the other end of the spectrum. But importantly, I don't think this is an either or choice. So why is old growth important? So why are we here today? Why is it an energized conversation across not only Rhode Island, but these same conversations are happening all over the place due to climate change and carbon conversations, new policies from the 30 by 30 and so forth. So I don't think Rhode Island is unique in it, but I think it makes sense to pause for a second and just talk a little bit about why we're interested in old growth forests. There isn't a charismatic wildlife species in our region that depends on old growth forests that we know of. We don't have the spotted owl like they have in the Pacific Northwest that was such a hot topic back in the 80s and 90s in regard to old growth forests. We have some species like lobaria that certainly grow in these mature forests that need that sort of structure for them to grow. But we don't have sort of that charismatic species. They are, however, these areas tend to be really excellent source populations to help maintain and stabilize populations across the landscape. So in other words, they produce more than offspring than they can have or carry. And so those individuals often go to other parts of the landscape. These also provide, these areas oftentimes provide stepping stones, and I'll come back to this idea at the end of the presentation when we talk about the landscape context, but stepping stones for species that don't fly thousands of miles. All right, there are invertebrates and others that need sort of this structure across the landscape, particularly for climate change mitigation. Again, when we started this project, it was largely because we thought intuitively it just makes sense that we need more old forests. We need more forests that have these kinds of structures. And to be honest, we weren't really able to point or say we need them because there isn't a lot back then. But over the last 15 years, I think the conversations regarding carbon storage and the role forests play in carbon has obviously grown to a fever pitch. It's very important, and these areas are just wonderful savings account, if you will, for carbon. And they are also, the characteristics that make these old growth characteristics that you might want to cultivate in your forests are also the very ones oftentimes that make the forest resilient. In fact, when we were writing our publications, Forest Resiliency and Forest Carbon, we often joke that we should just change the cover on Restoring Old Growth because there were a lot of similar concepts. The last thing I would say, and of course I'm sort of moving out on a limb here from the science, but I think old growth is important. I think we need to be humble. I think these are model systems that serve as baselines to see what would happen if we do nothing. A control, if you will. And this number that often keeps me humble is that 20% of species are documented worldwide. Now, importantly, that's worldwide. I don't know the number within New England, and in some ways it doesn't matter. Other than, I guess the point I want to make is we don't know what we don't know. And I think having old growth forests and having forests that are trending that way, we're allowing to develop that way, I think are important for all of these reasons. I also hear people talking sort of monolithically about old growth forests, and I think it's important to recognize that old growth forests are not all the same. Here are two old growth forests in Massachusetts, one a hemlock on the left and one a northern hardwood on the right. And as you can see, just from the species composition, they're different forests. These, just like all areas of our landscape, they're subject to different types of natural disturbances, some wind, some fire, some ice. Sites are different. Some, get a lot of water and have nice site indexes that are, very fertile sites. Some are low, but have high frequency types of disturbances, elevation, exposure. All of those site factors certainly affect what kind of vegetation and trees are most competitive on that site. So there's great diversity in that way. And then of course, just the land use history that our forests have undergone have led to differences as well. So importantly, it's not as if all successional trajectories lead to the same old growth forest. So let's talk about some of the specifics about old growth forests and what makes them different. So I'm going to use this term structure, and I've already used it, and I probably should have defined it earlier. But every forest has different parts to it, and when we talk about structure, we're talking about those parts, their arrangement, and the amount of those parts. Okay, so how many layers does it have? How many cavities does it have? Down wood, etc. All of those are structural components, and there's a different structure in old growth forests. Because of that land use history I spoke about, we have, as I mentioned, generally very even aged kinds of forests, because a lot of them grew up at the same time, farm abandonment, or maybe when the pine was cleared. But old growth forests see a real diversity of both sizes and ages, including regeneration, all the way up to very large trees. And they also have very old trees in it, which is that sort of hallmark characteristic that we all think of when we talk about old growth. Snags, so we have large standing dead trees in these areas, large down logs, and again, please note that I put large in both of those bullets, because it's not just about being dead, it's about being big and dead. And then we see these gaps in the forest canopy that obviously relate to the first bullet in terms of diversifying size and age and structure and so forth. But we don't see, just like one continuous canopy like you would in a very even age forest. So there are some definitive differences in old growth forests relative to second growth. This is some of the work that Tony did for his dissertation, and recognize it comes from Massachusetts, so I've tried to sort of adjust accordingly. But just to give you a sense, what Tony found in his research up here is that generally speaking, old growth forests have about 2 to 4 times more dead wood on the forest floor than second growth forests. Now, because we were working, or he was working in more hemlock stands, which are shade tolerant and can really pack in the trees and things, it's likely that Rhode Island is probably more on the 2-time end of that. But regardless, more 2 or more cords times the amount of dead wood on that forest floor. Importantly, and this comes into play when we talk about management strategies, that dead wood is in a variety of decay classes. So, we want a conveyor belt of dead wood coming into that system, because we have trees that have just fallen, trees that are a little bit, decayed, maybe losing their bark. Then we get trees that are squishy, start getting spongy. And then we got some trees that, you wouldn't even recognize it was a dead tree because it's so decomposed. That brings different benefits, different structure to the forest. And so one of the things to consider when restoring old growth is the amount and these periodic pulses, or these periodic additions to the system. Same for standing dead wood. Again, you're probably in Rhode Island a little bit on the lower end of that, but there are 2 to 3 times more snags in these old growth forests than in second growth. So, and again, they're in a variety of decay classes, I guess, if you will. So some maybe have just snapped off. Some have, their bark that's starting to slough and insects are starting to invade, and some are getting ready to fall over, and pileated woodpeckers are getting there and excavating, and then they'll fall over and be, of course, contribution to the dead wood in there. But again, think of it as a conveyor belt, think of it as pulses. You want periodic creation of this kind of dead wood. There's a difference in the bark. So here are 3 pictures of red oak. 3 very different, types of bark, but all the same species. So we're most familiar oftentimes with that middle picture. So that red oak, it's got that, those plates, those silver plates and the red furrows in between. But if you let trees grow longer and get old, you will see that they create what's known as a tertiary bark. And I've tried to highlight it there. I know it doesn't stand out too well, but it's sort of a diagonal line there where the complexity of the bark itself increases. And this is just more opportunity for insects to get in there and to use those nooks and crannies to survive, which provides greater foraging opportunities for birds and things. Also, please note, I didn't say larger trees bark changes. I said the age of the tree as it gets older. So, we have to pull apart sometimes the size of a tree from its age, because although they're related, it's not a 1-to-1 ratio. So it's age in this case. The same with crown morphology, the architecture of those crowns. This is a picture of a old growth sugar maple in a stand up in Western Massachusetts. And you can see the crown is just beat up. I mean, it looks almost like a bonsai crown to me. And that's because it has been subject for 200 or so years to windstorms and ice storms and heavy snow and so forth. And so this different crown morphology actually has different habitat values for perching and things. So again, this is something that doesn't come with necessarily big trees, but it comes with big old trees. So an important concept when we talk about approaches to restoring old growth involve just a quick reminder for many of you about succession. So these outside rings I'm not going to talk about because that's more of a carbon talk, but it's the clock face that I'm most interested in drawing your attention to. So let's just say that the numbers on the clock are the years since the last big event, disturbance in a forest. Let's call it pasture abandonment at year 0. So with every year that goes by, our forests develop in more or less a pretty regular sort of known trajectory that we get, shade intolerant in, and then we get shade mid tolerance, then finally shade tolerant species. So the clock right now is pointing to 100 years old, and that's generally where we are, in many of our forests across the region. However, importantly, the clock hands can be moved forward or backwards, right? If we want to create early successional species habitat, we know how to do that. We go in, we cut trees, and we start the clock back to 0. And then, we've got great early successional habitat for the next 10 or 15 years. And if we want to maintain it, we got to go back in and set that clock back. However, we can also move the clock forward. So we can, by releasing shade tolerant trees, we can actually move that clock forward and sort of increase or the rate that the succession is moving. So that leads us to our 2 approaches for increasing the amount of old growth like forests in our region. And the first is a passive approach. Let nature take its course. Just take hands off, do nothing. And we will see old growth structure develop through time as we see more disturbances drive that system. Okay, so we'll have ice storms that kill a couple trees, or a microburst that'll create a gap, that'll initiate a new cohort, new seedlings. It'll diversify the age and the size. It'll create some dead wood standing, some dead wood down. So it's these disturbances that actually drive the system, and we just let it play out. Just give it time. It will give us, the most natural appearance. There are no stumps, there are no skid roads. It's just all just letting the system knows what to do. Let's be humble. I will say though, it's not do nothing. And I tell people that quite often, that if you are going to take this approach, particularly on only part of a property, but certainly the whole property as well, make sure you document that you're doing this. Okay, this can take decades, as we saw in that original diagram. We're at about year 100, and we start seeing the accumulation of these at around 200. These characteristics. So it takes decades, and it means documenting and communicating that with the next owner. Or within your organization, coming up with some documentation. If you're working with private landowners, it's really critical to do conservation-based estate planning, to pair these 2 approaches, either through a conservation easement or through some other legal tool, to make sure that the forest is there long enough to actually develop these kinds of structures. I'm asked frequently, and people will say, "Oh, I'm going to take a passive approach," and then then what happens? Boom. We get some sort of wind event, and they're like, I don't know, it looks so messy in there. Know that it's okay, that these are, the forest isn't damaged in the sense that this is what drives these systems. They've adapted to this. We're seeing more frequent, more intense events, but this is the kind of event that creates the structure we're looking for. For those of you interested in salvaging, I would suggest, stick to your plan. Try to keep some patches, areas that are not salvaged, and limit sort of that limit of live trees coming out. But this is the kind of thing that helps drive and create these structures. So here we are back to our diagram, and it will take, roughly 100 years or so. And of course, that's just a ballpark based on site and things. It's different. But if you wanted to speed up the trajectory, there are also some things that you can do in order to move that clock forward. And these are just sort of standard practices that a forester has in their toolkit that we can apply to help, speed this clock up. So the first thing we can do is increase the number of large living trees. We know how to do that through thinning or reallocating space and resources to individuals that we want to grow faster, and they'll have that opportunity. This can be a good opportunity to focus. I'm going to talk about co-benefits at the end of the presentation, but there's no reason that you can't focus the removal on unacceptable growing stock. So you can still have an amount of timber harvesting or timber management that's compatible to this. But thinning is certainly something foresters have been doing for a very long time that can help us grow bigger trees that reach that structural goal. Again, that's the size. It doesn't mean you're making them older faster, of course, but their size will be bigger. There are a number of regeneration methods that we can employ. And this has been the trend in silviculture over the last 10 or 15 years, looking at keeping all aged, yep, got it, thanks, Kate, all ages out on that landscape so we can employ those techniques. This is probably the single biggest thing that you can do, which is just designating individual trees, I'm sorry, I went too fast, individual trees out there as legacy trees that you're not going to harvest. You're going to let them grow big. You're going to let them, naturally die, and you're going to let them naturally fall over. So, this is, leaving these legacy trees and just letting them play their life out, is what you can do to increase the number of snags. So they would stay on that. This is actually better for wildlife habitat. We can do this through girdling. And some of our, our early publication actually focused on this. They don't stand as long when you girdle them. You're creating a weak point, and it looks like from the research that there's better food opportunities if you just let the tree die naturally. But depending on your goals, you can do one or the other. You can certainly increase the down logs. We know how to do that. You can actually also focus on the culls, on low quality, and create periodic pulses. This is just a simple diagram we did. It's very cartoonish, but if this was an even age second growth forest like we have, and you were to come in and create some gaps, do some thinning, do some girdling, drop and leave, within 15 years, you start seeing how that canopy is diverse, creation of snags, down logs, bigger trees. You can start seeing how that plays out across the landscape. You can do this in a variety of intensities. So you can do it from, just a couple trees to a lot of trees. And you can do this with both shade tolerant and intolerant kinds of species. If you're trying to regenerate shade intolerant species, you can still do this and leave these patches of legacy and recruit this kind of structure. It doesn't need to be your only goal. So it can, be very compatible with other kinds of landowner goals out there. And the last thing I'm going to just talk about is just landscape context. Our landscapes look a lot like this. And, if you can add up properties that are even have one or two old trees or a patch or two of old trees, you start creating these stepping stones across the landscape that's actually creating this kind of structure out there. So a couple resources, if you're interested, masswoods.org, Caring for Your Land. These are the publications this talk is based on, the two on the left. And we're actually in the process of expanding these with Vermont Land Trust to all of New England. So we're hoping by the end of May or June to have a new updated publication out about old forests in New England. So I am going to leave it there, I guess, and hopefully I didn't go over too much, Kate, and I don't know if there's time for questions.
You are right on time, Paul. Thank you so much for your presentation, and we have 10 minutes for questions. We're going to keep the questions concise, and yeah, so if you have questions, feel free to either raise your hand or turn on your slide and wave, and we can go from there.
Putting them in the chat is fine too.
I have one question. This is Kyle Lemoyne from the Southern Conservation District. You mentioned for old growth characteristics that trees can be either very old or large. Is that an and statement, or is it, can you find a stand of very old trees, but they're not too large just because of how they may have grown and site characteristics and stuff like that?
Great question, great observation. You know, one of the things people get unfortunately disappointed in is if they walk into an old growth, forest and they've got these visions, particularly in the, from pictures they see in the Pacific Northwest, that you're going to see these huge trees. And sometimes you do. Sometimes you see some really big trees because they've had a lot of time to grow and develop. But that, so that can be, but it's not an essential part of it. There are some pitch pine scrub oak communities up on, ridge tops that are very old, that are just growing in, very low site index. It's just sort of sandy or gravelly soil. So they're the nutrients aren't there to sort of like support a 150-foot tall tree. So we got to be careful when we talk about size and age. As I said, there's a relationship, but it's not one-to-one. And I know that can be confusing. We want big trees, but we also want old trees.
We had a raised hand from Paul Roselli, the Burrillville Land Trust there. Go ahead,
Hi,
Paul.
thanks, Paul. Great presentation. I learned a lot. What I didn't hear, and I have a question about, is the soils around old growth forest. How are the soils any different than an old growth forest, at least the ones to today's soils, and not so much in terms of the rainfall or the acidity, but the structure of the soil itself. Have you noticed any difference? Does anybody notice any difference?
Yeah, so we have to be careful because the old growth remnants we have are in, just the very fact that we have so few doesn't give us a real representative sample across all soil types and things. And oftentimes we have the old growth because it was on a slope that was too steep to get to, or no one would want to get to. So we have to remember that although they are wonderful baselines and models, in some ways they are also a little extraordinary in some ways. If they haven't been harvested in, or if they haven't been cleared, there will be some differences in the soil. Certainly the fungal relationships and and everything alive in the soil may be different if it was cleared or not. So I do think there are some different relationships between certainly old growth and second growth, but I think also old growth and even primary forests, so forests that have been harvested in but have never been cleared. I think there are some good research on that, just that there are different relationships in those soils.
We have a couple questions in the chat as well. So Scott Rurin says, seems obvious to target invasive species also? Question?
No question about it. It is, I tell my silviculture class, it is now a part of silvicultural systems that, you need to be incorporating that in there. One of the things about old growth forests or restoring this is, you want to maintain, the structural complexity of that area, or cultivate it if it's not there now. And of course, invasives, can prohibit that. So absolutely. And Paul, I just had an afterthought. I'm sorry. I'm guessing that the carbon, amount in old growth forest is going to be more because it's been allowed to continue. So I don't know what those percentages are, but pretty confident it would be more. So sorry.
So taking another question from the chat. This one's from John Mitchell out in Prudence Island. Is there a role for prescribed burning to encourage old growth forest characteristics, particularly here in southern New England, where there's historically there was a lot more of that? Yeah. No, I get out of my depth when it comes to prescribed burns, so I'll give a short general answer, but I think there's an important role for fire in restoring these systems. If we're letting them through succession, and if we're taking away that disturbance, move to, I don't know, white pine, then I think there's a very important role in as a restoration tool. It's another one from Scott Rurin here. He's wondering about old vines and pit and mound topography being part of a definition for old vines. Certainly, pit and mound topography can be an indicator of
of an older site or a site that has never been cleared and has been allowed, it's been acted upon by natural disturbance. And of course, that's what creates that, right? The tip up mounds. So, pit and mound topography can be, it's like when you're identifying a tree, you don't necessarily just want to go based on one thing. You want to look at the leaf, the bark, the bud, so you would want to have a number of things that are helping you identify an older area. There are pitfalls. I didn't mean to say that. There are pitfalls to that, which is, you can just have a wet site that has pit and mound topography because, there's a lot of blowdown. So you want to use, multiple, you want to triangulate, I guess is what I'm saying. I haven't heard that about vines though, Scott.
So raised hand from David Gray.
Can you say more? You mentioned before about primary forest. Can you say more about what the effect is on, let's say, a very isolated cutting or harvesting in the distant past that was not followed by agricultural conversion? Is there some way that you think about that?
Yeah, I think the relationships, are probably different, or there's a greater, likelihood that those areas have a lot of the same components as old growth forests because they haven't been, they haven't had as much change. So it would have been common for a farmstead, would have been a necessity for a homestead, a farm to have a woodlot. And so, for whether it be barn boards or firewood or whatever they needed. So, we know that there are forests out there that have remained as forests. They're not old growth because they have been subject to, timber harvesting and going in and getting the wood they needed. However, they weren't cleared. They wouldn't have had pasture on them. Wouldn't have had soil plowing. For agriculture. So I think that those are a little bit different. And I think one of the papers I'm thinking about was done by a fellow by the name of a person by the name of Jesse Bellamere at Smith College, I think, that took a look at sort of like seed bank or something in those primary versus. So if my memory serves correct, that would be a thought.
So I see John's question in the chat that may be a good one to end on, but I wanted to ask one myself, if I may, since we still have a few minutes. I think many of us are acquainted with some older or old growth forest trees along the landscape that maybe along old stone walls running through the woods, legacy trees, copses, areas that maybe surrounded by wetlands along property boundaries, steep slopes, that sort of thing, or on islands. And wondering how these sort of fragments or pockets of old forest areas sort of figure into our consideration of this on the landscape, and how we might think about that in management.
Yeah. So if you as a landowner or landowner you're working with is interested in restoring more of this type of condition to their property, then I think one of the first things to do is to look for some of these characteristics, some of these attributes. If you do have a big old tree out there, or if you do have maybe a patch of old trees, and they could truly be old growth, or maybe they're not, and in some ways it may not matter, but certainly identifying those areas, building off of those, why start the clock at 80 years? Why not, jump into an area at 100, 150, choose those areas that have already started developing that, multi-layered forest, have some unique architecture, some down wood and things, and build off of those. And as I said, this can be done as a gradient. It could be done with one tree on a property. It could be done with a patch. It could be done with 25% of the basal area on a property and in a variety of spatial distributions. But the more people that do it, the more of these stepping stones, we sort of hit a critical mass where over a landscape, we allow for, a critical mass.
We have about, we have about
just,
1 more minute for answers. And John, actually, we can take this question offline, the last question in the chat, but keep going, Paul. We got 1 minute.
Oh, I thought I saw the word climate change in one of the. All right, so I guess I was just going to mention that, you know, these are the areas that accumulate lots of carbon. I mean, so when we talk about the role forests play, these you know, these old growth and older forests play, you know, an important role because the carbon pools continue to increase, and that was one of the slides I was showing with the brown just getting darker and darker. So trees get bigger. Dead wood has contributed, you know, more carbon in the soil. So, you know, it just over time we see, you know, more and more carbon contributed till it hits, you know, a point at about roughly 200 years or so where we start seeing the levels, you know, level off as we get, you know, accumulation of all of that. But these are, you know, really important areas for climate change. Notice I said carbon storage, not sequestration, because these areas aren't the highest at sequestering carbon. And it really is the balance of, I think, you know, these old forests with some younger forests that's ultimately, you know, a good approach. And it pairs well with early and late successional habitat.
We might just have time for, you know, addressing this you know, one more relatively quickly. But John Mitchell is wondering about, you know, considering old growth forests and climate change, in, you know, wondering specifically, you know, if or how that might change the species that one would encourage or focus on as legacy trees.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I'm sorry, I read that too fast, John. So I think there's some standard advice, you know, go with long-lived species. You know, we don't want some aspen, you know, counting on aspen or something, because it won't live long enough. So long-lived species, you know, hemlocks and pine and red oak, you know, are good bets. You want things, of course, like any other time, well adapted to future conditions. So both the current site, but also, you know, most likely drought tolerance, that are going to be resilient, that there isn't a known pest or pathogen sort of on the horizon. We know that may not, you know, that may not always be the case, but, you know, I don't know if I'd pick ash at this point. So in our publication Forest Resiliency, we have a table in both, you know, northern and southern New England that has a list of species that are predicted to do well, that are predicted to do about the same, or predicted to go down. It's just based on the Forest Service Tree Atlas, but we sort of distilled it down to a good table, John. So I would encourage you, if that's of interest, you can take a look at that and maybe pull some species off of that fit your site.
Thanks so much, Paul. This has been an excellent presentation. We really appreciate you being here today. Feel free to stay on for the rest of the meeting or log off, whatever you choose.
I'm going to stay on. I want to hear the rest.
All right.
Yeah, thank you.
Christopher?
Great. Yes. Well, next up, we've got Nathan Cornell of the Old Growth Tree Society. Glad to have him with us this afternoon, and he's going to talk about the Rhode Island Old Growth Forest Project. And Nathan, I welcome you to share your screen and take it away. And we'll have the same length of time, and look forward to a period of Q&A with Nathan as well.
Hello. Kate, do you have the PowerPoint sent you? Would it be possible for you to share on your screen? That might make it easier.
No problem. Hold on one second.
Thank you.
Just let me know when you want me to change the slide, okay?
Okay. Yeah, so this is my presentation about old growth trees and forests in Rhode Island. You can go to the next slide. So what's an old growth tree? So from my studies, an old growth tree is a tree that's over 100 years old that has developed certain old growth characteristics regarding the tree shape and bark, which distinguishes it from a second growth tree. And this picture, as you see, is a old growth tree in Warwick, which I estimate is about maybe 160 to 170 years old, possibly 200. Next slide. Was an old growth forest. So an old growth forest consists of trees of different ages, the oldest trees being over 100 years old, and these forests tend to have diverse native tree species that would not be commonly found in a second growth forest. Also, trees tend to have little to no underbrush and are spaced more far apart than in a second growth forest. Old growth forests also tend to have snags from old fallen trees that are home to a variety of fungi, birds, reptiles, amphibians, and mammals. And this picture you see here, this is actually in Warwick. This is a CCRI old growth forest. and it's one of the oldest forests in Rhode Island. So it's a mature American beech forest. Next slide. So types of old growth forests. So this is where a lot of people can get confused, but to clarify, so the first type are primary old growth forests. So these are forests that have never been cut down by humans. And these forests are, they're very rare because like almost all our forests have been altered in one way or another for either complete clear cutting for farming or cutting for lumber. So these forests are definitely not common. But one thing to find a primary old growth forest, one of the things you want to look for is an E horizon in the soil. So E horizon is between A and B horizon. And the reason why actually most soils in Rhode Island have no E horizon is because of our agricultural past. Because the plows for agriculture actually destroyed E horizon, altering the soil. So if you find any soil with E horizons, that signifies this soil hasn't been disturbed for hundreds to even thousands of years. So that's one of the ways you can find primary old growth forests. Also, other characteristics regarding old growth, primary old growth forests are a multiple canopy, which is and also a pit and mound topography. So that's one of the things that distinguishes it from emerging old growth forests, is because emerging old growth forests haven't developed the pit and mound topography, the E horizon soil, or the multiple canopy yet, but other old growth characteristics. And that leads me to emerging old growth forests. So these are forests that are the ones that we mostly find in Rhode Island. So they are about 100 to 250 years old. So they have already started to develop certain old growth characteristics. So that's balding bark, stag-headed treetops, and a lack of underbrush. And also they're still very rare. Like for trees 100 plus years old in Rhode Island, like only about 1% of our forests are of that age. And also there's a lot more animal plant diversity in these forests than a second growth forest. You can go to the next slide. And this is a picture of the Oakland forest. So how to tell an old growth tree. So there are different ways to tell old growth tree. The most accurate way is you can count the tree rings, but that can be a big process. So there's other ways by looking at certain characteristics of a tree. And this tree you see here is that's an old growth tree growing along a pond in Rhode Island that wasn't in Warwick, that wasn't cut down. So that's a very old tree, very large. But the thing, size and age also doesn't always correlate. For example, in Warwick, in the Dolly Farm Forest, we have a tree that's just white oak that's just shy of 4 feet in circumference, but is 150 years old. So even small trees can be very old. It just depends on their characteristics, whether they were in the shade of some larger tree at some point in time that stunted its growth or some other weather condition. But old trees are not necessarily big trees, and big trees are not necessarily old trees. So that's one thing that is important to know. Next slide. So old growth tree bark. So this is what we call balding bark. So this is usually in hardwoods like oaks. Is when what happens is when lichens start growing on the tree when it develops a certain age, and the outer bark starts peeling off. So this is not a sign of disease or that the tree is dying. It's just a sign that the tree is getting very old. So these two pictures here are a sign of balding bark. On the right, that's an oak that is having balding bark. So as you can see, the bark is starting to peel off. And it's right next to American beech. This is an old growth forest in Rhode Island. We call it canyon. And so it's starting to develop old growth characteristics. So this is proof that there are forests in Rhode Island that have old growth characteristics. And on the left, that's another pocket of old growth in another part of Warwick. And that tree also has balding bark, even more extreme, that most of the outer bark of the tree is gone, so, and replaced by these lichens. So that tree is very old. So this usually happens from around 100 years, 90 to 100 years old, based on my studies by tree coring and observing these trees. And also another thing I forgot to mention regarding vines. So when you see like large poison ivy vines around the trees, that can be a sign of age. And sometimes those poison ivy vines can be very old in themselves, but that can be a sign of age. So that's another thing to look for. So the next thing is old growth tree shape. So when trees are around for certain periods of time, they go through many weather events. So this creates a certain structure of the tree we call stag-headed tops. So the tops of these trees and the structure of the trees are completely different. So for example, in the winter, which is the best time to search for old growth, you can see like a old growth tree from a long way away just by seeing the structure of the tree, because it looks nothing like the trees around it. And that's one of the things you want to look for, because like if you know to look for this, you can find these old growth trees and identify them for protection. But we call them stag-headed tree tops, which is from just weather storms, weathering hurricanes, and things like that. Could you go to the next slide? Could you go to the next slide, please? Old growth tree roots. So so this is another characteristics of old growth is flared roots, which is when roots are above the ground, they're very prominent. And also like with very old oaks, you can see this too. Like this is a beech tree, but with oaks, when you have like, especially when they're growing on rocks, have these huge root systems that can be a sign of old growth. Could you go to the next slide? So lack of underbrush in old growth forest. So this is very important. So when you walk through old growth forest, usually it's actually very easy to walk through because there's hardly any underbrush, and there's also hardly any invasives as well. And that's because of the large canopy prevents this underbrush from growing, and also it prevents crowding. So instead you have a lot of large trees growing apart from each other and separately, and so you have these spaced trees from each other. Like for example, this is a forest in Warwick that's emerging old growth. So as you can see, there's like no underbrush. The only understory trees are native trees like hop hornbeam and witch hazel, and this is just caused by the canopy, and it creates balance. So there's like no overcrowding. So you don't have many small trees just growing together, crowned together. You just have large trees spaced apart. So that's another characteristic of old growth that I found in many old growth forests and Rhode Island, is that they have hardly any underbrush and hardly any invasives too. Like the most native forests in Rhode Island are old growth forests. Could you go to the next slide? So indicators of old growth forest. So while species can vary for old growth forests, there's certain species that you want to look for. For example, American beech, yellow birch, and sugar maples are a sign of an older forest, especially when they're mature. Like a mature American beech forest is actually quite rare in Rhode Island, and it's also a sign of age because it takes a long time for them to grow. Also, black, red, and white oaks are also commonly found in old growth forests, more so than red maples, which is in the next slide I'll describe later why that's the case. Other native trees that are found in old growth forests include tupelo, which are probably the oldest trees in Rhode Island because they can grow for a very long time, even up to 700,000 years. There's swamp white oak, that's another rare tree. There's American sycamore, Atlantic white cedar, sassafras, and the understory trees tend to be American hop hornbeam, and witch hazel. Those three trees are the ones, tree species are the ones I usually find in old growth forests as the understory trees. And these pictures are some American beech, emerging old growth American beech forest in Warwick. Could you go to the next slide, please?
I will. Can everyone please make sure that they are muted? Thank you.
So American beech. So American beech is, as I said before, it's a sign of a last stage mature forest, and since these beech trees grow slowly. So when you start seeing mature American beech, that means the forest has been around for a very long time. They tend to have smooth, shiny gray bark, except apparently sometimes they do have cracks. And they also, regarding age of American beech, they can grow up to 500 years old, but actually usually, for example, if you see an American beech tree 4 feet in circumference, that tree could very well be 100 years old. While if you see a American beech tree 8 feet in circumference, that tree is usually 200 plus years old. So like, because they're so slow growing. So like when you see these trees, and especially have these forests are our oldest forests in Rhode Island, apart from the tupelos, are probably American beech forests, because like they just grow so slowly and they're very old. For example, this picture of American beech that's in Warwick, that's from the CCRI old growth forest, and that's which is one of the oldest in Rhode Island, and that's 8 feet 10 inches in circumference. So that tree is between, I estimate, 200 to 300 years old, maybe even more, but nothing less than 200 years old. So they're there. So yellow birch is the another species commonly found in old growth forest, especially mature yellow birch trees. They're a sign of, they also grow very slowly. When they're young and mature, they're yellowish and flaky. However, as they get older, they start getting less flaky and more grayish. Like, for example, recently I found one on Audubon Society property. I didn't even recognize this yellow birch at first because it looked nothing like a yellow birch. Only by looking to the top of the tree, I was able to identify the tree, but it was completely gray. It looked more like an oak than a yellow birch. So that tree was ancient. But so they're there, and very old growth yellow birch trees are extremely rare because they were used by the timber industry a lot, and they were specifically targeted. So there's not many really old yellow birch trees. So most of the ones in Rhode Island are probably between 100 and 150 years old. And for example, yellow birch with a diameter of 6 inches could be 50 years old, and a yellow birch with a diameter of a foot can be 100 years old. So because they're growing, even smaller trees can be quite old. Next slide. Sugar maple. So staghead sugar maple trees are capable of being old, perhaps even 300 to 400 years old. And they are another sign of an old growth forest. What's interesting is that while sugar maples in Rhode Island are more in the northern part of Rhode Island, actually they used to be much more south. For example, in the old growth forest in Warwick, we actually have a sugar maple in one of our forests, even though it's not the region. So that's one of the things you find with old growth forest. You find species not commonly found there today because back then these species used to have a much larger range than they do today. So it could be quite interesting to. So in old growth forest, you can find some very interesting native species that you would never expect to be there. But sugar maples are one of, like American beech, yellow birch, sugar maples are 3 of the tree species that you would find in old growth forest. Next slide. How our forests have changed. So today the dominant tree species in Rhode Island are oaks and red maples, and pines also have become very prominent, are becoming more prominent. However, 400 years ago, when Roger Williams and the first settlers arrived, the forests were instead dominated by American beech and oaks, and there was also, and the third most dominant tree was American chestnut. And there were not nearly as many red maples or pines as there are today. And however, when the trees started growing back on the abandoned farmland, the American beech and yellow birch didn't come back as strongly as the oaks or the red maples. And especially the more you cut into the forest, the more you will see of these red maples, oaks, and in young second growth forests, the things I find that are dominant are like red maple, oak, black birch, and sometimes even black locust, which is not native to Rhode Island. That's actually from the south, that was introduced by farmers about 100 to 200 years ago. And there are such things as old growth white pine and red maple, but they're not common. They're quite rare. So if you find one, that's a very interesting find. And Rhode Island, especially with old growth eastern white pines, like there's not many of them because there was logged so much for ship mats during colonial times. And see the pictures here. So this is an old growth part, the old North Woods in Uri to the right, and to the left, that is the old growth forest at CCRI, which is quite old, and it just looks, old growth forests look nothing like second growth forests. Like it's night and day if you look at them. It's like there's no comparison. Like they're just very unique. Even emergent old growth forests, like that's why I had to come. That term is there because these forests, like while it's not primary old growth forest yet, it's definitely not second growth forest. So they have started developing certain old growth characteristics like balding bark, stag-headed tops, and lack underbrush, and also with a lot of plant animal diversity. They haven't achieved pit and mounds yet, but however, or the multiple canopies, but they will if we leave them alone. So could you go next slide, please? What if we do nothing? So our old growth forest right now, and we don't have many of them, but they are there in many different parts of the state. Like there's old growth forest in pockets in Warwick, Cranston, Portsmouth, South Kingstown, North Kingstown. So they're there, but they're very rare, but they're in serious danger of being destroyed, either for solar developments, which involves clear cutting large swaths of forest for solar, which is nonsensical to me, for land development, because no one sites for old growth before developments take place. and bad forestry operations, because forestry operations destroy old growth forests. Like I've witnessed it myself, and these forestry operations, like these forests just need to be left alone, because any like alteration of forest can completely destroy the ecosystem and wreak havoc on it, and it won't recover for a very long time. And one of the situations this happened to was YMCA. That was one of the greatest old growth forests in Rhode Island. I counted tree stumps that the trees cut down. Many were 130 plus years old. It was a mature American beech forest, a great ecosystem, and it was large too. It was about 100 acres. And in a timber harvest operation about 3 years ago by the USDA, they did timber harvest of this forest, and it looks like a bomb dropped off there. There's invasive underbrush all over the place. Most of the larger trees were cut down. The others were girdled. It's an ecological mess. And if we just left it alone, we wouldn't have those invasives there. It would still remain purely native, and it would become primary old growth in about 100 to 150 years. But now it's going to take a lot longer for that to happen because of what happened here. And this is a picture of one of the trees that was girdled, an old growth tree, which I don't know why that happened, but it was just a ecological disaster, and we need to prevent something like this from happening again, because I expect it's not the first time this has happened, and if we don't do something now, this won't be the last. And that's why also we need laws in the state of Rhode Island and ordinances in the cities and towns protecting these forests, because right now there are none. Next slide. So what happens when old growth forests is cut or managed? So when timber harvests take place, usually they go for the larger canopy trees, because like they're the most beneficial fiscally. However, that leaves the canopy opened up because you're destroying the canopy trees, and by opening up the canopy, it allows for invasives to thrive. And I've seen this, and happens all the time in Rhode Island, and it leads to underbrush covering these forests, because like unlike old growth forests, which have hardly any brush, second growth forests, especially after timber operations, have underbrush all over the place, and which also leads to a heightened amount of ticks too. So we're pretty much creating a tick paradise as well. So that's an issue. Also, when we're cutting down these forests, what a lot of people don't understand is that it actually causes pollution to cut down forests, even with timber harvest, because although some carbon is stored in the wood product, about 30 to 60% of the carbon stored in that tree is released into the atmosphere. So timber harvests do cause pollution, and that's something we need to keep in mind. And with old growth, it's even worse, because there's more carbon stored in old growth forests than any other forest. So when you cut down old growth forest, or even doing timber harvest on that forest, that's all that so much carbon gets released into the atmosphere. It's the opposite of fighting climate change. Like, to fight climate change, we need to keep these forests. These are our most important carbon sinks. And if we cut into them or alter them in any way, or allow timber harvest, it will destroy the forests and allow this pollution to happen. So also, as it says here, 10 to 20% of the world's global carbon emissions are from deforestation. And it's about that percentage too in like Washington State, where there's a big timber industry too. So that's another thing that people don't really like to talk about, but that's the fact of the matter is, like, the carbon gets released from these trees. Like, for example, a Sitka spruce in the West Coast, about 2/3 of the carbon gets released when those trees are cut down. That was a recent article by Washington Post regarding the Tongass rainforest in Alaska. So that's something we definitely need to keep in mind. Also, there's a idea out there that cutting old growth forests are good for fighting fires, but actually the opposite is true, because when you cut down the canopy trees, it allows wind to go right through these forests. So there's actually a heightened chance of wildfires. Also, with timber harvest, there's a lot of broken up smaller pieces of wood on the forest floor, so that can easily ignite. And also, there's underbrush all over the place, so that underbrush is great for forest fires. Meanwhile, with old growth forests, you have trees spaced widely apart, hardly any underbrush, and then you have large canopies preventing wind from flowing through that forest, and also keeps the forest floor cool and not dry, which would be perfect for wildfires. So actually to fight wildfires, we should keep our forest intact with reforestation, not timber harvest them, because that actually will have the opposite effect. And also the soil is disturbed, for example, with soil, because soil is very, it can be disturbed quite easily. When you have a timber harvest operation, you have trucks going through there and vehicles, and it can just disturb the soil, and that soil is not going to cover for hundreds of thousands of years. because like soil takes a long time to build up, especially if it has an E horizon and that's destroyed. To build another E horizon again, like to get a slight E horizon takes at least 200 years old, but a full scale E horizon takes thousands of years old. And also because of timber harvesting, there's none of those large down trees or snags that are home to a variety of creatures that depend on them. So that would be like insects, amphibians, fungi, and mammals. Next slide. So what if we let our native forest grow wild? So if we let our native forest grow wild, we will have trees, mature trees that will serve as canopies, so they'll prevent invasives from thriving. So you have more of these forests where trees are more spaced widely apart and lack of underbrush. And while some trees will be down in storms, this actually will be a good thing because those trees, as I said before, will become home to, those down trees will become home to a variety of different native flora and fauna. And more plants and animals live in old growth forests than any other forest. So if we create these types of forests and allow forests to become old growth again, we can create habitats for a lot more species than you have otherwise. And also with timber harvesting, one of the ideas is like to try to create new habitat, but by doing that, you're also destroying habitat for a variety, for many more creatures if you're doing it to an old growth forest. So if we leave our forests alone and allow them to become old growth again, or to stay old growth, you can have those habitats for multiple animal species. You'll see black bears return. For example, work in one of our older forests, we actually have a black bear that lives in there, and they live in there for a reason, because black bears, they love old growth forests, and they're important for ecosystems. Like you can see where they have dug holes, and they're just very important. And so because when we cut down the original forest, like before we had mountain lions, we had wolves, we had black bears, and these were also predators for deer. But now we have like a huge deer population, and they don't have many predators apart from coyotes. And these like mountain lions are not in Rhode Island anymore. We don't have wolves here, and it would be good for ecosystem to have these creatures back, so we can have this balanced ecosystem. And because we lost that when the original forest was cut, which was a huge disaster ecologically in Rhode Island. And also, and also regarding the carbon sink, so as these forests age over time, so they'll store more and more carbon, so they'll be important carbon sinks, which we need today regarding instance when we're fighting climate change. Because but the thing with old growth forests is that you just need to leave them alone, because like any alteration to the forest can completely destroy the ecosystem, and these forests will recover. And also, and even with the pit and mound topography and the multiple canopies, that will happen naturally. Because especially with climate change, it actually might accelerate some of the old growth forests, accelerate some of our second growth forests becoming old growth forests, because with the increase in windstorms, more trees will be downed. So there'll be more canopy gaps, which will allow for newer growth and will create this multiple canopy structure. So if we just leave it alone and do nothing, these forests will become old growth again, because they have in the past, and they will now. But we just need to allow this to happen. And in Rhode Island, we've never allowed this to happen. Like only in areas where people pretty much neglected their forest land are the areas that we have our old growth forests. Like on state-owned areas and city-owned areas, like many of those areas are, they're not old growth because they've been timber harvested and cut over and over again for decades. And we need to stop that practice. We need to designate our most important ecosystems, like forests that are 100+ years old, forests where more native plant and animal diversity. We need to leave them alone and not touch them at all, and they will become old growth forests again. And they'll be very important as we fight climate change, because we need this forest. And also these the trees also will be good for erosion, because they hold the soil together. They also are good for purifying the water, because the old growth trees can absorb more water than any other tree, and they're also the best at cleaning water. So it'll be good for our water quality as well. But we need these old growth forests, because we don't have enough, we don't have enough of them. We need more of them. We need to protect the ones we have, which are rare as they are, because now when you're cutting down the forest, they're not even coming back as the same native species as they were before. They're coming back as other native species that were not found in our original forest. So we need to preserve these old growth forests and also designate new ones, so we have them, because they're so important, and they're such important habitat for so many mammals, and animals, and also for many endangered species that we're not doing anything for them, and they will disappear unless we protect these rare native ecosystems.
We just have 1 minute
that's
left, Nathan. Just letting you know, 1 minute.
Yep. So that's the end of my presentation. This is an old growth tree in Warwick. So that's 17 feet 3 inches in circumference. Is a very ancient oak. So also you have these isolated old growth trees that are that here and there that are very large and are very ancient, that were left either because they were like on the edge of farmland or they're just trail markers. But yeah, so that's my presentation, and I welcome any questions.
It seems like we have a couple in the chat. I just stopped sharing so that I was able to see it. Scott Rurin, you have a question about the minimum area when deciding an old growth forest or just a patch of old trees.
Okay, so with old growth forest, like you want, of course, to protect the old growth forest area, but also you want to protect some second growth around it to protect the ecosystem, because usually when you're in Rhode Island, when you find old growth forest, the edges are, you tend to find invasives at the edges because people have been cutting into the edges. And like there's one in Warwick that people actually, like National Grid has been cutting along the edges of the forest, and now you have invasives and Japanese knotweed all along the edges. So that's why you need a protective layer to protect these ecosystems, so you can protect those invasives from going in. Because although old growth forests are more resistant to invasives, they're not immune to invasives. So we need to keep those invasives out, and the best way to do that is to have a surrounding protective layer of second growth.
Ethan, just to drill down on that a bit more, is there a minimum size, or in acres or another measurement that you would use, is that to classify as the sort of smallest old growth forest area that's more than a few old trees along an old stone wall, for example?
Yeah, so that really depends, and most of our old growth pockets are less than 10 acres. Like a lot of them are just like 3 to 5 acres, but like pretty much like anything acre more would be a good area to designate old growth. Not that we're saying we should ignore like a 0.5 acre area, because if there's an old growth forest around there, we should still protect it. But like, but this is not just about protecting trees along the rock wall. This is like forest, self-sustaining forest ecosystems that are there and were for some reason left there or have been left there to grow for a very long time. So it's not like they were just left there to be the edge of farmland.
Mm-hmm. Got another question here from Fern Graves in the chat, so I'm going to try to interpret a little bit. She's mentioning that some species, such as American beech, which you're speaking about, are subject to some serious forest health threats now. There's a nematode called causing beech leaf disease in Rhode Island that could lead to dramatic reduction of the distribution of the species. And she's wondering about promoting beech versus a mix of species that include oaks or hickories. And I think you could consider other species such as hemlock, ash, others that are affected by forest health threats, along with it. So
yeah, and unfortunately we have a lot of them, like beech bark disease. Like I'm in these forests all the time, and it's like depressing to see how bad the beech bark disease is. And one of the good things about, like, for example, in Rhode Island, we do have some areas where we have really healthy American beech, which I think I'm not quite sure why that is, but it must be something with their genetics, and also maybe because they're so old. But yeah, beech bark disease is wreaking havoc on many beech forests. We had the emerald ash borer. Hemlocks, they have taken a huge beating all across the East Coast. So like these trees are under a huge attack. Meanwhile, you have other species like American chestnut. The chestnut blight seems to be letting up a little bit, which is interesting, and I've been focusing on it because I found a American chestnut tree 44 inches in circumference in Rhode Island. So I think those could be coming back.
There is genetic resistance to beech bark disease. That is true. I was referring to beech leaf disease, where we have found no genetic resistance, unfortunately.
Yeah, so I'm not too familiar with that. I've heard of it, but I'm not too familiar with it or what it looks like. But yeah, it's a big problem. But the thing with these diseases, unfortunately, there's not much you can do. Like, for example, with the chestnut blight, what they try to do is like cut the trees to try to stop it. They were completely unsuccessful and actually made it worse because they just didn't cut down the 6 chestnut trees. They also cut down the resistant ones. So when you cut down all those, there was none to be resistant, and that's why you didn't have any resistant mature chestnut trees, because there were those, but they were harvested. So the thing with when you have disease in these forests, like instead of cutting them all down because they're going to die or fall down anyway, I think you just have to let it happen, because there's nothing you can do to stop it. And those down trees will become home for a variety of these creatures, and then you have a succession of forests take place where the ecosystem will change, but the forest will survive. Like, for example, the beech may be dying, but then you'll still have the oaks and the hickories, so it might be eventually become a more hickory dominated forest. Meanwhile, in some other area where you have a pine forest, you might have some young American beech trees and it might become more of an American beech pine dominated forest. So,
Well, in that case, wouldn't it make more sense than to let all of the trees die, to do something more mindful using the science and to encourage a more resilient forest? So you don't have, you always want death in a forest, but you don't want a pure monoculture to all die at once. As you said, that lets in invasive species, which we have a big problem with in Rhode Island.
yeah. And I know, and also I know that a lot of oaks have been like wiped out by the gypsy moths, and yeah, it poses a problem. But however, but when you also cut down all these diseased trees too, it can also like disrupt the healthy trees around it. For example, and also regarding trees, like one things that I'm interested in and I want to look into is how our native trees, like the genetics of our native trees compared to ones that we are planting, because there's differences there, and some of our native trees that are genetically linked to our state might be more superior resisting like the effects of climate change than trees that we are planting. So because those are raised in farms and don't have the same genes as our native forest ecosystems. But yeah, we like regarding tree diseases, like I know a forester, and he does try to like inject trees, for example, to try to heal them. Like it's a big process to like try to inject every tree in forest. That's a very difficult process, but that can be explored and might be preferable to allowing it to die. But the thing is, like one of the things I'm seeing in reaction to these trees is just to clear cut it all and then plant all new. And I don't know if that's the best way to go, because you're not just clear cutting dead trees, you're also clear cutting the healthy ones as well.
Got a question just to change gears or a little bit just about species, Nathan. You highlighted, certain species as being, particularly important in identifying old growth forests. Among them, I believe sugar maple, American beech, yellow birch, tupelo, I think hop hornbeam among them. And of course, you can have, all those trees and, different ages. And I was wondering how you came to sort of focus in on those particular species as being indicators of old forest, more than structure and ecological process.
Well, looking for forest for one American beech, like if you find American beech like 8 feet in circumference, like it's a given, it's probably around 200 years old. So just by the size of those trees, based on how long it takes for it to grow, like even when you have full beech trees 5 feet in circumference, it's still an old forest already because of how long it takes for that tree to grow to that size. And also, same thing with yellow birch trees. To find mature yellow birch trees, that it takes a very long time for yellow birch to grow large. So when that happens, you know that it is it's been growing there for a long time. So that's why and also American beech is known as a last stage mature forest. That's one of the things when you see American beech trees, it's a sign of a last stage mature forest. Like that's one of the things relating to American beech, and that's widely written on how the American beech is part of a last stage mature forest. And regarding hop hornbeam and witch hazel as understory trees, like from my observations when I go into these old growth forests, those are the ones I find. And they're usually not all together. Like, well, hop hornbeam and witch hazel is usually together, but American hornbeam is usually separate. Depends on the area, because like hop hornbeams tend to like drier areas, more rocky terrain. The hornbeam tends to like wetter areas. So, but however, sometimes they're get together, like in Lockton Valley in Portsmouth, like you have American hornbeam and hop hornbeam in the same place, which is unique. And also in some old growth forests, you don't have witch hazel, hop hornbeam, or hornbeam. It's just a straight American beech forest. But then you might have mountain laurel there instead, like an area found in Audubon property. So it really depends. So while those are the indicators, it doesn't mean like they all have to be there, or if you're lacking one, it's now an old growth forest. It's just from my experience, the old growth forests tend to have one or more of those species.
We have time for maybe one more question, keeping within our schedule. So does anyone have one last question? Raise your hand.
I'll throw one more out there. I think that you you spoke to the high deer populations that we currently have in Rhode Island, and we found that deer and their herbivory and impacts on forest regeneration, eating the seedlings and saplings of oak and other hardwood species in particular is often something that can cause these cleared areas in the understory of all different kinds of forests, younger ones, older ones. I was wondering how you would distinguish older forest areas with the type of understory you're describing, open and so forth, from ones that may have just been heavily impacted by deer through their herbivory and grazing on the understory.
Well, usually the other characteristics, so apart from the lack of underbrush, you have the bald and bark. Like that's one of the biggest ones, indicators of old growth forest, just because the bark structure is different because of age. So and then you have the staghead tree tops, and then you have the trees, larger trees more widely spaced apart. So it's not just lack of underbrush, but lack of underbrush is a sign of old growth forest, and it's you can tell like it's not because the deer have been eating there. Like there hasn't been underbrush there for a very long time. So it's not like recent lack of underbrush. There's just nothing there, except for the native understory trees like hop hornbeam, and witch hazel. And regarding the areas for deer habitat, I think we should focus more on making younger forest deer habitat than older forests, and pretty much make off limits like forests that are 100 or more years old or have these rare forest ecosystems, because like those are habitats for a lot more species than just deer or cottontail or something like that.
Thanks. Appreciate your responses to the questions. Thanks for joining us this afternoon, and welcome to continue to participate in the rest of the meeting, or head on depending on your schedule this afternoon. But at this point, we're gonna change gears.
Thank you for having me.
And we are going to turn our attention to the Forest Conservation Act, and we're going to hear from Jay Boudreau, DEM. It's going to speak to the purpose of the Forest Conservation Commission that it's established, and provide an update on that.
Thanks, Christopher. And thanks, Nate, and thanks, Paul, for your presentations. They were both super awesome, so I really appreciate it. One thing I will say is, I know I gave an update last time, but for the folks that aren't here or weren't there last time, the commission has been approved, was approved back in the summertime, and we have filled the positions for the public appointees. I'm going to be the representative for DEM, and there is still one rep that is coming from the administration, from the governor's office, that needs to be filled. And before we have that position, we can't have our first official meeting. My hope was to have that meeting in March. I'm waiting for a designee from the director of administration. And once we get that back, then we will have the full cadre of people and we can start meetings. So unfortunately, it may be pushed back to April, but I would hope that if it does get pushed back, that is going to be the last time that it gets pushed back before we can start meeting. But I don't want to move forward without actually having everyone on that committee or on the commission to start off. I want to start off on a good foot with everyone there. So we have been pressing DOA to get their rep, and then we will be good to go on that. So if there's any questions about that, otherwise, positions are full, we're ready to go, everything's been approved, so that's good. And then just to bring it back full circle for everyone, there was some language in the Forest Conservation Act legislation that kind of speaks to what we were talking about here today. A number of objectives, specifically about seeking input from key stakeholders to identify science-based initiatives to promote conservation of forest land in Rhode Island, to encourage forest conservation, to sequester carbon, mitigate climate change, and maintain the many benefits that forests provide Rhode Island, and to look at ways to expand Rhode Island forest products industry, recommend changes to impediments to the forest products industry, improve expansion to urban and community forestry, and to try to find and recommend new funding sources to help conserve forest land from rural to urban areas that we see as important. Pretty much exactly what we're talking about today, identifying characteristics of forests that might be at risk for development or change from their forested characteristics, and trying to find ways for us to be able to preserve them in ways that the commission sees fit. So like we talked about today, this kind of conversation is something that is perfect for debate and further study with the Forest Conservation Commission. And I would definitely welcome Nathaniel and Paul to come back to talk to us again, meet with the commission. There are some people that are here on the commission, and there are individuals that are not members of the Woodland Partnership that are part of it. And I think we're at a time right now, we're having this sort of conversation and getting definitions and getting these ideas out to the general public and to more people that are interested about old growth characteristics is something that would be perfect for the commission to tackle, maybe very early on in its existence. So this is coming at a perfect time where we're looking for activities for the commission to talk about and to take on. And I think having this, again, having this conversation is a wonderful way for us to kickstart it, because I know it's something that people are very passionate about. And everyone has a romantic version of forests in their head and when they see something. So I think having an understanding of the different types and the different classes, I think your chart, Paul, really characterized it really well, looking at, what's that 400 years? Where are we now? Where we could be in the next 100 years? And just looking at it like that, I think is a really succinct way of understanding where we are and what our possibilities are in classifying and protecting and diversifying our forests. So I appreciate it. I think it was really, really interesting for me to hear both sides, both you guys talk. So I appreciate it.
Thanks, TJ.
Yeah, I don't know if there's any questions, but otherwise things are moving along. So.
Anybody have questions for TJ? All right. Well, I think we'll transition into updates. We've got a pretty good group here this afternoon. So say if anyone has an update that they'd like to share, you can raise your hand or just unmute yourself and speak up respectfully, and we can go around and share updates as people have them.
I've got a couple. I didn't raise my hand, sorry. Well, I'm just gonna go.
Go for it, Kate.
So the Farms Ranch Stress Assistance Network of Rhode Island, which is a group working through the Rhode Island Mediation Center with the Department of Environmental Management, is looking for some folks, members of our forest community, to participate in their work group to identify ways to assist people who work in the forest, farmers, with stress management. So just throwing it out there, want to make sure everyone's aware that that's happening. And I just want to flag that the Land Trust Council is hosting a few workshops as we approach the conference with Audubon in July. And what might be relevant to our Prudence Island trip is that we are hosting the Be Ready for Ticks program, Dr. Thomas Mather, from URI, down at URI on March 22nd. It's a Saturday. We're going to be both filming it. So if you want to watch virtually, you can stream it, or you can attend, and just let me know if you want to come. And I'm going to toss it to Paul, who has his hand up.
I'm just following directions. That was it. Somebody, anyway. A continuation of a project that we've now almost a year old. We are actively pursuing our American chestnut tree project. We've received a little bit of money, some seed money to do this. We've started to grow some of our American chestnut trees, both what we think of as native or what we think they are native. At least that's what the material says when we receive the chestnuts, along with hybrids. We're working with Nuts and Bolts Nursery in Smithfield, Rhode Island. They'll be growing what we hope will be close to 300 American chestnut trees. And then we're still working on what we do with those trees. We're going to plant quite a few next to some existing trees that we have in some of our properties. And then we'll be giving some away with some very interesting goals and surveys on making sure they get in the right place and they get cataloged so we know what's going on. So that's our American chestnut tree project. And so far, so good. I'll lower my hand now.
Fern, why don't you go next?
Sure. So I'm going to put on my entomologist hat, and I have very bad news. Some of you already know, I'm sure, South Carolina has lost control of their Asian longhorn beetle area. It's likely that this is for good. This is the introduction. It's coming. It's in the swamps around the National Forest. And that's bad news. For those of you who don't know, Asian longhorn beetle was the beetle that I did my research on. It prefers maple and willow are the big ones that we have. The good news is oak and hickory, not so much. Pine and hemlock, not really. But our maple and willow is going to be in big trouble. It also uses elm, although we've lost most of those anyway. So sorry for the bad news.
Wow, that's a big update, Fern. Very unfortunate. It's the first time I've heard that.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. I'm sure we'll be learning a lot more about that.
Alana, you want to go next? Follow that up?
I guess I have better news. It's not about, at least about pest outbreak or spread. I just wanted to announce that FEMC just released their 2022 RFP for their ecosystem monitoring fund, which is just a funding to support projects in the 7 FEMC participating states, so New England and New York, related to forest ecosystem monitoring. So they are funding projects up to $25,000 with a required 1-to-1 non-federal match. And I can share that announcement so everybody can read the RFP if anybody's interested. I could do that through. Are we still, is the best communication? I missed the end of last meeting.
Just send it over, Alana, and I will attach it to a follow-up.
Perfect, thanks. So hopefully that's a little bit better news, some money available.
Lou, you want to go next?
Sure. So just a couple updates. We have our urban community forestry grant program. We're accepting applications through March 31st. Lots of information on that on our website, or feel free to give me an email if you're interested. And then also we are having an arborist workshop on Friday, March 11th. And I have information, the agenda, and to sign up if anybody's interested. I have it in the chat here. Thank you.
Nancy.
I gotta tip this again. The Northeast State Foresters Association, the grant they have for the securing carbon. I did send out an email and get some responses for the Rhode Island component that has been sitting in on the carbon workshops. Once I tidy it up, I'll share the links for all 4 presentations with you, Kate, and you can send them out. So, and I think I'm just mentioning because, you know, it was one of the things Nate had mentioned about carbon, that there's quite a lot of efforts going on, particularly in the Northeast, regarding education and promoting management of forests for carbon. So we will be having kind of a small meeting of some of the people who engage directly with landowners, and on the, I have to remember, the 28th of February, to just to talk about some ideas and, you know, do we have any particular information or materials needs? We can, I've volunteered with the committee to help with the further development of the web pages, and would like to see some state-specific information and stuff on there. So we will be looking to get some input on how we want to message and have a common communication to our landowners in the state. So that's something that'll be coming up. And I think Mark and Chris have all, you know, said they could come. So we'll have a good group to try and take that the next steps that'll work for Rhode Island.
Nancy, could you just speak to the goals of the project a little bit more, in addition to getting everyone, foresters, conservationists, landowners, thinking about forest carbon and incorporating it into their management? Is there there are steps we would like landowners to undertake? Do we want as many as possible to sign up for forest carbon offset programs, for example? Or
well, there's well, you've sat in on them. That's a trick question, Christopher. You know, it's pretty complex. The Northeast State Foresters Association is the lead on this, and the goal is to see property and acreage under management that supports sustained carbon sequestration and storage. And so what we have to do as their goal is to provide us, each state, with the information so that we can communicate to our landowners. In Rhode Island, that tends to be consultants such as yourself and other state, the Forest Legacy Program, Fern Stewardship Program, that kind of thing, to communicate and to incorporate carbon into the management plan. So it's already the template for the state for the stewardship plan for FFOS and for the NRCS, and Fern can tell me what, because I forget what the name of that particular program is, but to make sure that carbon is an option, and we're going to be expanding on some of that language, that where you've got landowners that are interested in carbon, then that language can be incorporated into their management plan. And then, of course, like you said, there are carbon markets that that are available that also target small landowners, because a lot of the carbon markets have been for really large acreage of land. So this is for 40 acres. Some of them I think are a little less, and provide information so that you can educate your landowners on what kinds of options are out there and what they may want to consider. You know, and then the fact that there are limitations, like some programs you can't already have easements on. If you're going to put your land into the carbon market, there's some other issues, and it's been very nice. So I would encourage anyone who hasn't seen the presentations to watch them. I certainly intend to watch them the second time because there's so much information there, but it was very helpful in helping to identify what kind of potential opportunities there are for forest management and sequestering carbon, or securing carbon, as the project is called. And there are some, I just got an email with some ideas on, hey, with all this federal money coming down, there may be some other opportunities to apply for more funds to do some other concrete things. So, you know, with all the challenges we face with all of the insects and the deer and the diseases, we'll try to figure out how to keep some of our trees in place so that we can maintain that carbon. But it certainly is for the land trusts. I think, Kate, this is something that would be really beneficial to share with them for the kinds of acreages that they have, and encourage them to have active management plans. It doesn't have to be a harvesting plan, but it does have to be a plan that includes managing for carbon. So it does have some potential. I think it's kind of exciting, and it hopefully we'll be able to dig down more into that and get more clarification. It might be worth at some point, Christopher and Kate, to have, if you think one of those particular markets or approaches would be suitable to some of your clients, to have somebody speak here at some time and explain it a bit more.
Good
you know.
plan. Good idea.
So it is exciting. We'll just see how far we can take it, but appreciate everybody's input into it. That's for sure.
Thank you. Mark.
Is just a comment here. I think Jen West may follow up offline, but she was just wondering if there's any sort of communication training that's offered, I think to natural resource professionals as part of this initiative. I think that's a very good thing to talk about, and we'll see if we can get the website in the chat here. But not to hold up the updates, are we moving on to Mark here?
Yeah, I just want to sort of update you guys on the RIFCO workshops that are coming up. We have our March 5th workshop that's going to focus on carbon, forest carbon. Christopher's speaking, giving us an introduction to that based on some of the securing Northeast carbon materials, I guess. But the big draw, I think, because we've got pretty good response, is the biochar presentation and demonstration. And so we'll have a live, we'll be burning wood and making biochar in the back of the West Greenwich community town hall there. And the Rhode Island Biochar Initiative has been launched. You can go to biochar-ri.org and check it out. And on the 12th, we're doing a wildlife-oriented workshop, and on the 19th, we're doing a sawmilling workshop up at the RIFCO Woodlot. So, just if you have any questions, let me know.
Thanks, Mark.
Send me an email.
Thank you. Appreciated. Scott Millar, you're next.
Thanks, Kate. Just a quick update. Some good news, I hope. As you may know, I've been working with the town of Charlestown for about a year, and a substantial update and improvement for conservation development. For those who may not be familiar with conservation development, it's similar to cluster development, only it uses a very specific site design process to determine in advance what are the most important natural areas to protect on a parcel of land. And the big improvements that we've made to this version of it is to identify the conservation opportunity areas, specifically the core forest. So, and also the town of Charlestown in a 2-acre zone is going to be now allowing lot sizes to as small as 20,000 square feet. So you can protect, as land is getting developed, there's the potential to protect about 75% of that parcel in perpetuity as forest without having to purchase it. We're also making improvements to more effectively accommodate low impact development. The Planning Commission just voted last week to approve of the ordinance. They're sending it forward to the Charleston Town Council for a public hearing that'll probably be in April. I'll keep you posted.
Scott, can I ask a question? Is the yield any greater?
The density remains the same on the house lots. By state law, with any kind of cluster development, the density has to remain the same. So if a site could accommodate 10 houses under a conventional subdivision, it would be 10 houses under a conservation development.
Thanks, Scott. Good update. David, you're next.
I just wanted to do a quick follow-up, Kate, on your mention of the recordings of these meetings. So they're on our YouTube channel. So youtube.com/user/RI Natural History, all one word. And if you're not a subscriber, please subscribe, and then you'll get notices every time we put up one of these meetings or something else. And there's a playlist for Rhode Island Woodland Partnership. So if you go to playlists, you can select that and you'll get just these meetings, or you can look at whatever else we've got up there. And if you run right over there now, you can be the 300th subscriber, because I see we're at 299. So there you go.
Smash that subscribe button, right? Like that's what we say.
As the kids say.
Thank you.
Just add a couple of updates for upcoming events, but there's the climate adaptive forestry research project that I'm involved with, and we're working on developing a workshop that'll allow sort of practicing foresters to help provide input into shaping some of the prescriptions in a field tour. And I will likely it'll be in late March or early April, and I'll be in touch with more information about that directly, but something to just receive a heads up about. Would be great to get robust participation in that. And then again, I'll just mention the Forestry for Rhode Island's birds professional training that we're looking forward to having on Tuesday, May 24th. Knock on wood, we'll be able to, get together in person at the Woody Loudon Recreation Center in Foster, and then head over to the Rifco woodlot nearby to see, how bird-friendly forestry practices have been implemented. Continuing ed credits are available, and hopefully it'll be a good opportunity for some, discussion and interaction, between, foresters, land trust professionals, biologists out there in the field. Do you have any other updates from those of us who've been here throughout the meeting? I just wanted to bring your attention to a lot of good information that's in the chat here, including some more information from Paul Catanzaro. More information for the Forest Manager's Guide to Restoring Late Successional Forests. Haven't been able to check that out just yet, but that's on the Masswoods website, which is so much good information there, and links to a number of the other programs we've been discussing.
I saved the chat, Christopher, so we have access to all those links and I can make sure we get those out.
Great. Well, I think we were, coming up on 3 o'clock. So, this, brings us to the end of the February Rhode Island Woodland Partnership meeting, but really appreciate, all of your participation in contributions, your presentation, Paul, and I'm not sure that Nathan is still here, but him as well. Our next scheduled meeting is going to be on the afternoon of Thursday, March 17th, the usual third Thursday at 1 p.m. Believe that we'll be hearing from Groundwork Providence staff on their Trees for Us project, which is a Rhode Island Health Equity Zone grant project, urban tree planting for climate and health, trying to engage some folks in Pawtucket and Central Falls, families, individuals who haven't had a chance to be directly involved in previous tree planting efforts. So I think that'll be a really interesting presentation. I think we'll likely be able to hear more about what the Providence Neighborhood Planting Program is doing later in the spring, and hope that all of you had the chance to put your availability into the survey for the trip to Prudence Island.
Please do.
I'm looking forward to that.
Mark, did you have one last thing to say?
I just had a quick question about, I didn't know if anybody had any update about the Forest Legacy Program and whether or not DEM has moved forward to hire a coordinator for that.
I think, yeah, they have.
Yes, we do. And he's going to be at the meeting on the 28th. Just a sec, Brandon, and he's got a kind of, I don't know why I find his last name a little tricky. Just a second.
He just started last week, Mark.
Yeah.
And
Buckless, Brendan Buckless. He's.
I saw the name.
Yeah.
I saw the name in the email string. I didn't realize who it was.
Yes, so I forwarded him all the presentations. They haven't been tweaked to make publicly available, but I sent him everything we gotten, and he's going to be at the meeting, so that'll be a good opportunity to meet him, and for him to meet, a bunch of the players. So
hooray!
Yay!
Great. Well, thanks so much to everyone. We will adjourn the meeting here. Hope to see as many of you possible next month.
Thanks.
Have a good afternoon. And
Thanks, everyone.
Natural History Survey videos are made possible through the generous contributions of members and friends. Want to help us do more environmental science and conservation? Hit the like button, share our videos with your circle, subscribe, or make a financial contribution on our website, ranhs.org, or through Patreon. Thanks, and see you out there.